Walter John Matthau was born Walter Jake Matthau on October 1, 1920, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the son of impoverished Russian Jewish immigrants who lived in a cold-water tenement on Rivington Street. His father, Milton, was a failed process server who abandoned the family when Walter was 3. His mother, Rose, sewed piecework in sweatshops for pennies. Walter grew up sharing one bed with his brother, selling newspapers at age 8, and learning to steal coal from passing trucks to heat the apartment. He was tall, homely, and already had the sour, hangdog face that would later make him famous. At 12, he was acting in Yiddish theater for 50 cents a night just to put food on the table. By 15, he was 6'3", weighed 130 pounds, and looked like a walking skeleton with a permanent scowl. Pearl Harbor came when he was 21. He tried to enlist immediately, but the recruiters took one look at his 2200 vision and flat feet and laughed him out. He kept trying. In 1942, the Army Air Forces lowered their standards and took him. They sent him to radioman school in Missouri, then gunnery school in Las Vegas. He graduated top of his class in both and shipped to England with the 453rd Bomb Group, 8th Air Force, based at Old Buckenham, Norfolk. He was a staff sergeant, radio man, and waist gunner on a B-24 Liberator named Big Ass Bird 2. His secondary station was the Sperry Ball Turret, the tiny plexiglass bubble that hung beneath the plane where a man had to curl into a fetal position to fit. He flew his first mission on March 16, 1944, Augsburg, Germany. Temperature at altitude, minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The ball turret had no heat. Walter sat with his knees to his chest, oxygen mask frozen to his face, twin .5 calibers iced up. Fingers so numb he had to fire by feel. Over the target, the flak was thick enough to walk on. A shell burst 50 feet away and shredded the plane next to him. He watched 10 men disappear in a red mist. He never blinked. He kept firing until the guns were empty. He flew 32 missions total, 12 more than required, including the infamous Berlin raid of March 18, 1944, when the 8th Air Force lost 43 bombers in one day. His plane took flak in the bomb bay. The bombardier was killed instantly. Walter dragged the body out, patched the intercom, and called in the coordinates so the bombs could still drop. They limped home on 3 engines. He earned 6 battle stars, the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, and frostbite scars on both cheeks that never went away. On one mission over Munich, the oxygen system failed at 28,000 feet. Walter passed out in the ball turret. The pilot dove to 10,000 feet to revive the crew. When he came to, his fingers were black. He spent 2 weeks in hospital and went right back to flying. He never told his mother. He wrote her letters saying he was pushing paper in London. He came home in May 1945 with $400, a duffel bag full of frozen flight suits, and a gambling habit he picked up playing poker at 20,000 feet. He used the GI Bill to study acting at the dramatic workshop of the New School. He changed his last name to Matthau. Matthau sounded too Jewish for 1940s Broadway. He played heavies on stage, then in films, The Kentuckian, The Indian Fighter, A Face in the Crowd. In 1962, he played the drunken sheriff in Lonely Are the Brave, opposite Kirk Douglas. In 1966, he won an Oscar for The Fortune Cookie with Jack Lemmon. They made 10 more films together. He was Felix's slob roommate in The Odd Couple, the grumpy coach in The Bad News Bears, the con man in The Sunshine Boys. Critics called him lazy and cynical. Veterans recognized the look, the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had seen friends vaporized over Germany. He married twice, had 3 children, and never quit smoking or gambling. He kept his Air Medal in a shoebox and refused all interviews about the war until 1995, when he finally told a reporter, "I was scared every single mission. The only thing colder than the turret was my blood." He died of colon cancer on July 1, 2000, at age 79. He was buried at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village with a simple marker that reads, Walter Matthau, SST-SGT U.S. Air Forces, World War II. No mention of the Oscar. No mention of Felix Ungar. Just the rank he earned, freezing in a ball turret over Berlin. Walter Matthau was the poorest kid on the Lower East Side, who spent the war curled in a metal egg under a bomber, shooting at the sky, while the sky shot back. Every time he slumped on screen, every time he grumbled, every time he looked like the world had already beaten him, it wasn't acting. It was memory. The grumpiest man in Hollywood had once been the coldest gunner in the 8th Air Force, and he carried that ice in his bones for the rest of his life.
Rodmond Edward Serling was born on December 25, 1924, in Syracuse, New York, the second son of Samuel and Esther Serling, a Jewish family that ran a small grocery store. Little Rod was short, scrappy, and already telling stories at age 6, banging out tales on a toy typewriter while standing on a chair so he could reach the keys. He was a born show-off, class clown, debate champion, and amateur boxer who fought in the Golden Gloves at 115 pounds. When Pearl Harbor happened, he was 16 and tried to enlist the day after graduation. The Army told him to wait. In May 1943, the day he turned 18, he walked into the recruiting office in Binghamton and signed up for the paratroops because they paid an extra $50 a month. They sent him to Camp Toccoa, Georgia, home of the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 11th Airborne Division, the hardest training in the Army. He was 5'4", 98 pounds, soaking wet, and the drill instructors tried to break him. They made him run Currahee Mountain 3 times a day with a full pack. Rod ran it 4 times just to prove he could. He earned his silver wings and the nickname the Crazy Jew because he volunteered for every dangerous detail. In January 1945, the 511th shipped to the Pacific. They landed on Leyte Day, then jumped into Luzon behind Japanese lines on February 23, 1945. Rod's platoon was tasked with seizing Tagatai Ridge. They fought hand-to-hand with bayonets and grenades. Rod killed his first man at 10 feet with a .45. He never forgot the look in the Japanese soldiers' eyes. The campaign from Manila was house-to-house slaughter. On May 15, 1945, Rod's company was holding a street corner when an artillery crate dropped by a supply plane fell on his best friend, Private Melvin Levy. The crate crushed him instantly. Rod stood there screaming at the sky while bullets whined overhead. That night he wrote in his diary, "There is no justice, only random death." The image never left him. He earned a Bronze Star for dragging a wounded sergeant 300 yards under fire, and a Purple Heart when shrapnel tore open his knee during the battle from Mount Malapino. By the time the 511th reached southern Luzon, Rod was a corporal with a permanent limp and eyes that had seen too much. He came home in January 1946 with $187, a duffel bag full of nightmares, and a determination to tell the truth about war. He used the GI Bill to study at Antioch College, wrote for the campus radio station, and sold his first script to WLW in Cincinnati for $35. He moved to New York, then Hollywood, churning out teleplays for Kraft Television Theater, Playhouse 90, Studio One. In 1959, he created The Twilight Zone, a series CBS only accepted after he disguised his anti-war, anti-racism, anti-McCarthy messages as science fiction. Episodes like The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, Death's Head Revisited, and He's Alive were straight from his foxhole. Fear turns men into monsters, Nazis never really die, and random death can strike anyone. He wrote 92 of the 156 episodes himself, chain-smoking 4 packs a day, pacing the set like a man still under fire. He narrated every one with that unmistakable voice, clipped, urgent, haunted. He won 6 Emmys, fought network censors every week, and refused to soften the truth. When asked why his stories were so dark, he said, "I saw darkness. I survived it. Now I show it, so maybe the next kid won't have to." He hosted Night Gallery, taught at Ithaca College, and spoke out against the Vietnam War on every campus that would have him. He had open heart surgery in 1975 after his first heart attack. Doctors told him to quit smoking. He didn't. On June 28, 1975, during a second surgery, he died on the operating table at age 50. His ashes were scattered over Cayuga Lake in New York, the place he loved most. Rod Serling was the shortest paratrooper in the 511th Airborne and the tallest conscience television ever had. Every time he stepped into the Twilight Zone to warn us about ourselves, he was still that kid screaming at the sky while his best friend lay crushed under a crate of food. He wrote 156 episodes so that America would never forget what he could never forget: that war is random, senseless, and always waiting in the next dimension of sight and sound.
Donald J. Rickles was born on May 8, 1926, in Jackson Heights, Queens. The only child of Max Rickles, a Lithuanian Jewish insurance salesman who loved the ponies, and Etta, a tough Brooklyn girl who ruled the house with a wooden spoon and a louder mouth than her son would ever have. Don grew up in a middle-class apartment filled with cigarette smoke and Yiddish curses. He was short, skinny, and had a face that looked like it was already mad at you. At Horace Mann High School, he was voted class comedian, not because he was funny yet, but because he never shut up and nobody dared tell him to. When Pearl Harbor happened, he was 15 and already doing impressions of teachers in the cafeteria. By graduation in 1944, the Navy needed bodies more than jokes. He enlisted on June 28, 1944, lied about his age, barely needed to, and reported to Newport, Rhode Island as an apprentice seaman with a mouth that never made it past the gangway. Boot camp tried to break him. Drill instructors screamed in his face. Don screamed back louder. They made him scrub decks with a toothbrush. He asked if they wanted the gold fillings polished too. They sent him to torpedo school in San Diego because, as one chief put it, at least down there he'll be surrounded by things that explode. He graduated as a seaman first class and shipped out to the Western Pacific aboard USS Cyrene, AGP-13, a motor torpedo boat tender that serviced PT boats in the Philippines and Okinawa campaigns. His battle station was Torpedo Tube 2 on the fantail. His real job was loading 2,000-pound Mark 13 torpedoes into the tubes while the ship rolled in typhoon seas. The work was backbreaking, dangerous, and hot as hell. Don kept the crew laughing by insulting officers over the 1MC loudspeaker when he thought no one was listening. Someone always was. He saw combat up close when PT boats limped back, shredded by Japanese shore batteries. He helped haul dead and dying sailors aboard, patched hulls, reloaded tubes, and sent the boats out again. On April 1, 1945, during the Okinawa invasion, the Cyrene was anchored in Karamaretto when a kamikaze Val dive bomber came straight for them. General quarters sounded. Don ran to his station barefoot. The Val missed by 50 yards and crashed into the water, spraying the deck with burning gasoline. Don's only comment later: "Even the Japanese pilots can't stand my act." He spent VJ Day in Subic Bay, drunk on torpedo alcohol mixed with Coca-Cola, insulting a rear admiral to his face at the officers' club. The admiral laughed so hard he bought Don a beer. Don kept the empty bottle for 50 years. He was discharged on June 27, 1946, with the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, Philippine Liberation Ribbon, and a reputation as the only sailor in the Pacific Fleet who could roast a four-striper and live to tell it. He came home with $212 and enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts on the GI Bill because it was cheaper than therapy. He played bit parts, drove a laundry truck, and bombed in nightclubs, until one night in 1957 at Slate Brothers in Los Angeles, Frank Sinatra walked in. Don looked at him and said, "Make yourself at home, Frank. Hit somebody." The room froze. Sinatra laughed until he cried. From that night on, Don Rickles was Mr. Warmth, the insult comic who could say anything to anybody and get away with it, because the Navy had already taught him that rank meant nothing when the shooting started. He roasted presidents, mobsters, and every celebrity in Hollywood. He made millions on stage in Vegas, starred in Kelly's Heroes, played the casino boss in Casino, and voiced Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story. He married Barbara Sklar in 1965. They stayed together 57 years until his death. He never lost the Queen's accent or the sailor's mouth. When asked why he insulted everyone, he said, "In the Navy, if you didn't bust the guy next to you, you cried. I never cried." He died of kidney failure on April 6, 2017, at age 90. His last words to his wife were, "I love you, dummy." He was buried at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills with a simple marker that reads, Don Rickles, S1, U.S. Navy, World War II. No mention of the roasts, the movies, or the millions of laughs, just the rating he held when he loaded torpedoes and told admirals to go to hell. Don Rickles was the loudest mouth in the Pacific Fleet and the softest heart in show business. Every insult he ever hurled was just a sailor's way of saying "I love you" to a world that once tried to kill him. The merchant of venom learned his craft keeping scared kids alive on a torpedo tender, and he spent the rest of his life proving that the best way to survive hell is to laugh at it, loudly, rudely, and without apology.
Bernice Frankel was born on May 13, 1922, in Brooklyn, New York, the middle child of Jewish immigrants from Austria and Russia. She grew up in Cambridge, Maryland, where her parents ran a women's clothing store. She was 6 foot tall by 15, flat-chested, deep-voiced, and already answering to B because nobody could pronounce Bernice. She hated dolls, loved horses, and terrified boys who tried to tease her. She studied to be a lab technician, but when Pearl Harbor happened, she was 19 and burning to serve. The Navy waves turned her down for being too tall. The WACs said her eyesight was bad. On February 18, 1943, one of the very first days women were allowed to enlist, she walked into the new U.S. Marine Corps Women's Reserve Recruiting Office in New York City and signed up. The recruiter asked why. She wrote in the blank space, "I want to serve my country, and I'm tired of people telling me I can't because I'm a woman." They sent her to Hunter College in the Bronx for basic training, then to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina for motor transport school. She learned to drive every vehicle the Corps had, jeeps, trucks, even amphibious DUKWs, and could rebuild a carburetor faster than most men. She rose quickly, private to private first class, to corporal, to sergeant, to staff sergeant in just 28 months. Her final billet was Headquarters Marine Corps in Washington, D.C., where she worked as a typist and driver for generals. Her fitness reports were brutal in their honesty. "Frankel is officially requested to moderate her direct manner," wrote one colonel. Another officer noted, "Tall, competent, and frankly terrifying. Best driver we have. Do not argue with her." She stood ramrod straight, wore her uniform like it was tailored on Mount Olympus, and never smiled in photographs. Off-duty, she smoked cigarettes, drank beer with the enlisted men, which scandalized the officers, and once told a lieutenant colonel who grabbed her arm, "Touch me again and I'll break it off." The incident disappeared from her record. Nobody wanted to mess with Staff Sergeant Frankel. She was honorably discharged on September 29, 1945, with the Good Conduct Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, and a reputation as the toughest woman in the Women's Reserve. She came home, changed her last name to Arthur, inspired by a cousin, and used the GI Bill to study drama at the New School in New York. She played queens, witches, and battle axes on stage because, as one director said, she walks in and the room salutes. She won a Tony in 1966 for playing Vera Charles in Mame, opposite Angela Lansbury, then became television's ultimate no-nonsense broad, Maude Findlay on Maude, 1972-78, and Dorothy Zbornak on The Golden Girls. 6 foot tall, deep-voiced, and capable of silencing a room with one raised eyebrow, she never had to act tough. She just took the uniform off and kept going. She married twice, briefly to a fellow Marine, then for 48 years to director Jean Sachs, adopted 2 sons, and never talked publicly about her service until 2001, when a Marine Corps historian found her records. She shrugged and said, "I was a Marine. I typed. I drove trucks. I scared people. End of story." She refused all interviews after that. She died of lung cancer on April 25, 2009, at age 86. She was cremated and her ashes scattered at sea, no headstone, no military marker, as her request. The Marine Corps still honored her with a full-dress memorial at the Women Marine Association convention that year. The commandant's letter read, "Staff Sergeant Bernice Frankel set the standard for every woman who followed. Semper Fi." Bea Arthur was one of the first women ever to wear the globe and anchor, and she wore it like armor for the rest of her life. Every time Dorothy Zbornak stared down a room full of people and delivered a line that could peel paint, America was watching a real Marine Corps staff sergeant who had already proven she could take on anything and win.
Arthur William Matthew Carney was born on November 4, 1918, in Mount Vernon, New York, the youngest of 6 boys in an Irish Catholic family that never had 2 nickels to rub together. His father, Fred, was a newspaper linotype operator who drank the rent money. His mother, Helen, took in washing to keep the lights on. Art was small, shy, and already had the rubber face and nervous energy that would later make him Ed Norton. He played the harmonica on street corners for pennies and dropped out of high school to join a traveling band. By 1939, he was doing impressions on radio and making $35 a week. When Pearl Harbor hit, he was 23, married to his high school sweetheart Jean Myers and the father of a baby son. He tried to enlist the next day. Flat feet and a trick knee kept him 4F until June 1944, when the Army finally took him and shipped him to the 104th Infantry Division, the Timberwolf Division, at Camp Carson, Colorado. He trained as a machine gunner with the 415th Infantry Regiment. In September 1944, the division sailed for France, landing at Cherbourg 30 days after D-Day. Art's company pushed inland through hedgerow country, then into the Siegfried Line. On October 23, 1944, near Aachen, Germany, his squad was ordered to take a concrete pillbox that had held up the advance for 3 days. They attacked at dawn. Art's water-cooled M1919 opened up from the hip. He knocked out the pillbox and kept firing until a German sniper put a round through his right thigh. The bullet shattered the femur and severed nerves. He went down screaming in the mud while the rest of the squad finished the job. Medics dragged him to an aid station, then to a field hospital in Belgium. Surgeons rebuilt the leg with steel pins and told him he would never walk without a cane. He spent 9 months in hospitals in England and the States, learning to limp with a smile so his wife wouldn't cry. The Army awarded him the Purple Heart, the European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 4 battle stars, and a 40% disability pension. He was discharged in July 1945 as a private first class with a permanent hitch in his gait that he would carry for the rest of his life. He came home, took radio jobs, and in 1950 landed a spot on Cavalcade of Stars with Jackie Gleason. Gleason saw the way Art walked and said, "Kid, you don't need to act funny. You already move like a cartoon." In 1955, The Honeymooners premiered. Ed Norton's goofy shuffle, the way he hopped when excited, the slight drag of the right leg, it wasn't choreography. It was a machine gun wound from a pillbox in Germany. Audiences laughed for 39 episodes and never knew they were watching a real combat veteran who had earned his limp the hard way. He won 6 Emmys for Norton, an Oscar for Harry and Tonto, 1974, and starred in The Late Show, Going in Style, and House Calls. He made over 100 films and television shows, always with that same uneven walk. He never complained, never asked for sympathy, and never talked about the war until 1994, when a reporter finally asked about the limp. Art smiled and said, "Souvenir from a German who didn't like my shooting." He married Jean for 55 years until her death, then married again at 82. He had 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and kept his Purple Heart in a drawer next to his harmonicas.
He died of natural causes on November 9, 2003, at age 85, 5 days after his birthday. He was buried at Riverside Cemetery in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, with a simple stone that reads, Art Carney, PFC, U.S. Army, World War II. No mention of the Emmys, no mention of Ed Norton. Just the rank he held when he took a sniper's bullet so his squad could live. Art Carney was the quietest hero television ever had. Every time he shuffled down those tenement stairs in Brooklyn, every time he hopped around Ralph Cramden like a broken marionette, America was laughing at a genuine combat infantryman who had already given his leg for their freedom. The sweetest, goofiest man on television had once been the bravest kid in a Timberwolf machine gun squad, and he carried that courage in every painful step for the rest of his life.
Edward Albert Heimberger was born on April 22, 1906, in Rock Island, Illinois, the eldest son of a real estate broker who went broke in the Depression. The family moved to Minneapolis, where young Eddie sold newspapers, worked as a trapeze artist in a traveling carnival, and changed his last name to Albert because nobody could spell Heimberger. By 1936, he was a Broadway star, a contract player at Warner Bros., and secretly working for U.S. Army intelligence in Mexico, photographing Nazi sympathizers at Acapulco resorts under the cover of running a circus act. When Pearl Harbor hit, he was 35, already famous for Brother Rat and engaged to Mexican actress Margot. He tried to enlist immediately. The Navy told him he was too old. He kept trying until July 1942, when Naval Intelligence finally commissioned him as a lieutenant, junior grade, because of his pre-war espionage work. They sent him to the Pacific as a salvage and rescue officer. His official job was to recover wrecked landing craft and clear reefs. His real job was to get Marines off beaches alive. On November 20, 1943, D-Day at Tarawa Atoll, Betio Island, Eddie was in command of LCVP-30, a Higgins boat attached to the 2nd Marine Division. The tide was wrong. The reef was exposed. Most landing craft grounded 500 yards from shore. Marines waded in chest-deep water under withering fire from Japanese 8-inch guns and machine gun nests. Hundreds were cut down before they reached the sand. Eddie's boat was one of the few that made it to the beach. He beached hard, dropped the ramp, and watched the first wave get slaughtered. Instead of retreating, he backed off the reef, turned around, and went back in, again and again. For 36 hours, he ran his Higgins boat through machine gun fire and burning oil slicks, picking up wounded Marines who were floating face down or clinging to wreckage. Japanese snipers shot at him from the pier. Shells exploded around the boat. He stood on the bow in full view, shouting for survivors, pulling men aboard with his bare hands. By the time the battle was over, he had rescued 47 Marines and recovered 32 bodies. His boat was riddled with 117 bullet holes. He was recommended for the Silver Star. The Navy downgraded it to the Bronze Star with Combat V because officers aren't supposed to act like enlisted men. He stayed in the Pacific through Saipan and Tinian, then volunteered for submarine duty as a beach reconnaissance officer. He was discharged in December 1945 as a full lieutenant with the Bronze Star, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 5 battle stars, and a back full of coral scars from dragging men over the reef. He never told a soul. He came home, married Margot, and went back to acting like nothing had happened. He starred in Roman Holiday, Oklahoma, The Tea House of the August Moon, and became television's Oliver Wendell Douglas on Green Acres for 6 seasons, the city slicker turned farmer who talked to pigs and saluted the flag every morning because he had seen what happened when the flag went down. He and Margot became 2 of the earliest Hollywood activists, fighting the blacklist, marching for civil rights, and getting arrested at anti-war protests. He was nominated for 2 Oscars, won a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and founded the first organic food co-op in Los Angeles.
He kept his Bronze Star citation in a manila envelope marked junk and refused every interview about Tarawa until 1994, when the 2nd Marine Division held a 50th anniversary reunion. A grizzled old sergeant stood up, pointed at Eddie, and said, "That's the officer who pulled me out of the water when I was sure I was dead. I owe him my life." Eddie cried, the only time anyone ever saw him do it. He died of pneumonia on May 26, 2005, at age 99 in his home in Pacific Palisades, surrounded by his family. He was buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park with a simple military headstone that reads, Eddie Albert, Lieutenant, U.S. Navy, World War II, Bronze Star. No mention of Green Acres. No mention of the Oscars. Just the rank he earned running a Higgins boat through hell to bring 47 Marines home from a beach that devoured thousands. Eddie Albert was the Hollywood star who had already been the real hero long before he ever played one. Every time Oliver Douglas stood at attention and saluted the flag, America was watching a genuine combat veteran who had once stood on the bow of a landing craft under fire, reaching into blood-red water for one more Marine, proving that courage isn't loud, it's just refusing to leave anyone behind.
Ernest Borgnine was born M.S. Ephron Borgnino on January 24, 1917, in Hamden, Connecticut, the only child of Italian immigrants who spoke no English at home. His father, Camillo, was a stern foundry worker. His mother, Anna, was a countess in Italy who had fled an arranged marriage and now scrubbed floors. Little Hermes grew up big, loud, and happy, playing stickball in the streets and eating pasta 7 nights a week. When his parents separated in 1922, Anna took him back to Italy for 2 years. He returned speaking fluent Italian and already built like a brick wall. At James Hill House High School, he was the kid who could lift the front end of a Model T. He graduated in 1935 with no plans except to avoid the factory. He enlisted in the United States Navy on September 29, 1935, 6 years before Pearl Harbor, because the recruiter promised 3 square meals and a cot. They sent him to Newport, then to the destroyer USS Lamberton, DD-119, in the Pacific. For the next 10 years, he was a gunner's mate, loading 5-inch guns, painting the ship, standing watch in typhoons, and boxing and smoker fights. He was Asiatic Fleet Heavyweight Champion 1937 to 1938. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, he was on leave in San Diego. He raced back to his ship, now the USS PC-461, a tiny patrol craft converted to anti-submarine duty. He hunted U-boats in the Atlantic, depth-charged German wolf packs off Newfoundland, and escorted convoys through storms that snapped steel cables like string. In 1943, he transferred to the submarine chaser USS SC-1032, then in late 1943 to the amphibious force. By June 6, 1944, he was a gunner's mate first class aboard USS LCIL-321, a landing craft infantry, large, one of the first wave off Omaha Beach Dog Green sector, the bloodiest stretch of sand in history. At 0630, the ramp dropped. Ernest was on the starboard 50 caliber, firing at pillboxes while the bow hit the beach. German 88s and MG-42s opened up. The first 20 men off the ramp were cut down before their feet touched sand. Ernest kept firing until the barrels glowed red. The skipper backed off, circled, and went in again. For 36 hours, LCI-321 ran the gauntlet, unloading troops and taking wounded aboard while shells tore holes the size of bathtubs. Ernest helped carry burned and broken boys below, patched holes with anything that would fit, and never stopped shooting. His ship took 32 casualties and kept going. By the time the beach was secure, Ernest had fired over 10,000 rounds and personally carried 17 wounded men to safety. He stayed in Europe through the war, then volunteered for the occupation force in Japan.
He finally came home in October 1945 with 10 years of sea time, the Navy Good Conduct Medal with 4 stars, the European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with Battle Star, the American Defense Service Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. He weighed 240 pounds, had a chest like a gorilla, and a grin that could light a room. His mother told him, "Ernie, you're too ugly to work in a factory. Go be an actor." He laughed, enrolled at the Randall School of Drama in Hartford on the GI Bill, and discovered he loved the stage. He worked summer stock, then Broadway, then Hollywood. He played tough sergeants and sadistic villains, Fatso Judson in From Here to Eternity, the role that made Sinatra vomit, the brutal guard in Bad Day at Black Rock, the Viking chieftain in The Vikings. Director said, "Just be yourself, Ernie, only meaner." Then, in 1955, came Marty, a lonely, overweight Bronx butcher who just wants to be loved. Ernest played him soft, shy, heartbreaking. He won the Oscar for Best Actor, beating Brando, James Dean, and Frank Sinatra. The toughest sailor in the fleet cried like a baby on stage. He made over 200 films and television shows, McHale's Navy for 4 years as the lovable skipper, Airwolf, The Poseidon Adventure, The Dirty Dozen, and SpongeBob, Mermaid Man. He married 5 times, the 5th to Tova lasted 40 years, had 4 children, and never stopped smiling. He kept his navy blues in the closet and his Oscar on the toilet tank, so it wouldn't get a big head. He died of kidney failure on July 8, 2012, at age 95 in Cedars-Sinai with his family around him. He was buried at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills in his navy dress blues with his gunner's mate stripes. The headstone reads simply, Ernest Borgnine, GM1, U.S. Navy, World War II. Ernest Borgnine spent 10 years loading guns and storming beaches, then spent 60 more proving that the toughest men can have the softest hearts. Every time he smiled on screen, wide, warm, and real, you were seeing the same sailor who once stood on a burning deck at Omaha, refusing to let one more kid die on his watch. The meanest face in Hollywood belonged to the gentlest hero the Navy ever had.